Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to my podcast, Gone in the Dark. Today's episode covers a case that shocked the world, not just because of its tragic ending, but because of how many warning signs were ignored along the way.
Gabby and Brian seemed like a loving couple, but behind the scenes, they would get into arguments.
It was like every parent's nightmare, just like in a flash of a second. She's gone, she's missing.
The happiest people on social media usually have the darkest skeletons in their closet.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Gabby.
And this is our Ford Transit Connect that we've been living in. And we thought it was finally time to give you a tour.
We've all seen the headlines. We've all heard the name Gabby Petito. But this episode isn't just about retelling a story we already know. It's about understanding what was happening behind the scenes, what we missed, what the documentary revealed, and what this case teaches us about abusive relationships. Because the signs were there. They were always there. And yet, they were so easy to overlook, especially when everything seemed so perfect on the outside. Gabby and Brian's relationship was picture perfect on social media. Couple traveling the country, chasing their dreams, sharing their journey with the world. But behind the beautiful Instagram posts and dreamy van life aesthetic, something much darker was happening. This episode isn't just a recap. It's a wake-up call for anyone who has ever overlooked the warning signs of an abusive relationship. The most dangerous time for a victim of abuse is often when they try to leave. Studies show that when an abuser senses they're losing control, their behavior escalates. Abuse isn't just about anger, it's about power and control. And when that control is threatened, the risk of violence increases. That's why recognizing the warning signs early is so critical. We'll break down the full timeline, uncover what was really going on behind the scenes, and discuss how this case has shaped domestic violence awareness. Because understanding these signs could save a life.
What were they doing?
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
On August 12th, 2021, a 911 call came into the Moab Police Department in Utah. A witness reported seeing a man hitting a woman near a white van with Florida plates. Minutes later, police spot the van swerving near Arches National Park and pull it over. Gabby is in the passenger seat, visibly distressed, crying, shaking, apologizing. Brian Laundrie, on the other hand, is calm, too calm. He laughs with officers, cracks jokes, and downplays what happened. Despite a 911 caller reporting that Brian hit Gabby, officers classified Gabby as the primary aggressor. Both had visible injuries. Brian had scratches on his face, while Gabby had marks on her arms and face, but officers focused on Brian's wounds. Instead of further investigating the 911 report or the possibility of defensive injuries, they separated the two for the night. Brian was placed in a hotel that partners with law enforcement to provide temporary shelter for individuals involved in domestic incidents, while Gabby remained alone in the van.
What's going on? How come you're crying?
I'm sorry, we've just been fighting this morning. Some personal issues. I'm sorry that I'm so mean because sometimes I have OCD and sometimes I just get really frustrated.
And the flies here are pretty intense, so the flies have definitely been getting to her. And then my feet are dirty and everything, so I think that our little squabble started because we were hanging out at the coffee shop, and when we got back to the van, there was some dirt and stuff in the van.
We've just been fighting all morning, and he wouldn't let me in the car before. And then
Why wouldn't he let you in the car? Because of your OCD?
He told me I needed to calm down.
We weren't physical before the point where I said, all right, let's just take a breather and like walk away for a minute. I'll lock the van up and I'll go for a walk this way, and you can go walk that way in the block.
You don't trigger anything.
She started hitting him.
Yeah, I was yelling at him, and then when you turned your lights on, I like kind of punched his arm like there's an idiot.
She's saying the witness says I never saw him hit her. I saw him shove her, but I couldn't tell if it was an aggression against her or a defense against her. Unless the guy's screaming that he needs to go to jail and did something to this girl, it sounds to me like she is the primary aggressor.
You got 3 scratches on your neck. You got 1 on your left side of your neck. You got 1 on your face here, and you've got 4 that are bleeding over there.
I'm not complaining about
Is it bruised or tender or anything like
No,
that?
no, no. Okay. I'm fine, and I love Gabby. I hope she doesn't have too many complaints about me.
15 days later, she was gone. On September 1st, Brian returned home to Florida, driving Gabby's van, alone. Her family hadn't heard from her since August 27th. And besides a suspicious text that would come in on the 30th, Gabby is never heard from again. Her family demanded answers. Brian refused to speak, and his parents, absolutely silent. On September 11th, her family reported her missing, and the search for answers was just beginning. Gabby was born on March 19th, 1999. From the very start, her mother, Nicole, remembers her as full of energy, loud, lively, and always on the move. Gabby's parents, Joe and Nicole, were together until she was about 6 months old before amicably going their separate ways. Even as a little girl, Gabby's creativity stood out. Her stepmother, Tara, recalled how she would cover the kitchen table with her artwork, completely immersed for hours. Her stepfather, Jim, added that every piece she made was filled with incredible detail. As she grew older, her artistic side only flourished. In high school, she found her place in the art community, surrounded by people who shared her passion. She had big dreams, a free spirit, and a deep love for adventure. In March 2019, Brian moved into a townhome on Long Island. Not long after, he spotted Gabby on her way to a deli. He recognized her because they had mutual friends in high school. He later described it as love at first sight, pulling over, running up to her, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. When Nicole finally met Brian, she found him socially awkward but polite and quiet. Gabby's stepfather, Jim, added that he made a good first impression, shaking hands, looking people in the eye. And at the time, they liked him. Gabby's stepmother, Tara, remembered asking if they were dating, but Gabby brushed it off, insisting they were just friends. One day, Gabby asked her mother what she thought about her moving to Florida with Brian. The question caught her mother off guard. Gabby and Brian hadn't even officially announced they were dating. Still, it was clear they were serious, and Nicole couldn't help but feel it was all happening fast. Gabby's stepmother was also surprised. The next day, she was already in Florida, she recalled. Tara believed Brian played a role in how quickly Gabby made the decision to move. A friend later confirmed that Brian had been eager to move back to Florida to be closer to his family, especially his nephews and older sister Cassie. His parents, Christopher and Roberta, had him later in life, and Cassie was nearly 10 years older. And now, Brian and Gabby were moving in with Brian's parents. At first, things seemed to be going well with the move. Gabby's mother, Nicole, said Gabby was happy in Florida, and Brian's mother, Roberta, welcomed her warmly. Roberta was sweet. She knitted often and even made things for Gabby. But over time, her attitude shifted. She wasn't as warm as she once had been. Gabby got the impression that Roberta resented how much time Brian spent with her. To Nicole, her behavior seemed odd because it almost seemed like she was jealous. One night in particular, Roberta had baked a pie, but when no one paid attention to it, she became upset and stopped speaking to them entirely. Gabby later told her mother how bizarre and uncomfortable it was. After that night, Gabby no longer felt at home. She felt unwelcome. Shortly after that, Nicole received a letter from the post office. Gabby's mailing address had been changed back to Nicole's home address. She was confused, so she texted Gabby. "Did you change your address back home? Are you moving back?" Gabby responded saying, "No, I didn't change it." She was just as confused as her mother, but had a suspicion. "I wonder if it was Brian's parents," she said. "It's really strange, and they haven't been speaking to me." She believed Roberta had done it, but didn't want to talk about it further. While down in Florida, Gabby downloads Bumble for Friends, hoping to meet new people, and this is how she meets Rose. And the two quickly hit it off. They became very close, seeing each other at least twice a week. Rose fondly recalled how when she worked as a delivery driver at Domino's, Gabby would sit with her in the car while she delivered pizzas. She endearingly referred to Gabby as her service human. They spent so much time together that Gabby eventually told Rose that Brian wanted to meet her, so the three of them went to the beach. Rose remembers when she met Brian that he was polite but distant. "He just sat back, reading his book while Gabby and I hung out," she recalled. She said it felt less like a boyfriend joining them and more like a parent supervising a playdate. The dynamic was strange. When she got home, Rose told her mom he was really nice, but there's something off about him. And over time, that feeling only grew stronger. As their friendship progressed, Rose began to see more of Brian's dark side, even in the art he created. When she saw him and Gabby together, they seemed like a loving couple. But when it was just Rose and Gabby, it became clear how manipulative he could be. One night, Rose waited an hour and a half for Gabby to meet her at Rose's house. They were going to meet and drive together to go line dancing. Gabby was taking a while to get there, so Rose asked her where she was. Gabby explained that she had almost made it to Rose's house when she realized her ID was missing from her wallet. She had to turn around and go home to find it. When Gabby got home to look for her ID, she found out that Brian admittedly stole her ID because he didn't want her to go out. Gabby ended up texting Rose apologizing and that she was crying because her and Brian got into a huge fight. Rose started to notice a pattern. Brian would upset Gabby, but then he'd shower her with gifts, doing something sweet to make up for his manipulative behavior. And despite how hurt she felt, Gabby would rationalize it. She would say, "No, I'm lucky. I don't deserve him." Rose said, "When they shower you with gifts and love, it blinds you. It makes you ignore the moments when they make you cry, when they make you feel unworthy of their love. Because then they turn around and say, 'Look what I did for you.'" Brian had it all planned out. He told a friend he was going to propose to Gabby, and he wanted it to be something special. They were camping, far from everything, a secluded lake, towering trees, wildlife moving in the background, just the two of them. Brian proposed to Gabby without a ring. Later, he posted on Instagram, "My biggest fear is that one day I'll wake up and it will have all been a dream, till death do us part or until I wake up." I'm so happy the answer was yes. Gabby's mother didn't hear the news from her daughter. Instead, she saw it first on Facebook. It was a post made by Brian's mother, Roberta Laundrie. Immediately, she texted Gabby. "Whoa, you're engaged?" Gabby responded casually. "Yeah, Brian proposed to me while we were camping. It was really sweet." Nicole asked, "Where's your ring?" Gabby admitted she didn't have one yet, but said they would get one eventually. Her stepmother, Tara, had the same reaction. She turned to Gabby's father and asked if he knew about the engagement, but he hadn't. Brian never asked Joe for permission to marry Gabby. For Joe and Tara, this was shocking. Nicole said something about it felt off. Gabby hadn't wanted to tell anyone, and that in itself was strange. Even her best friend Rose was taken aback. At first, Gabby seemed happy, excited. She talked about her future with Brian, about their plans, but over time, the excitement faded. A friend later explained that marriage wasn't their focus. Their priority was traveling the country, living life on the road. Gabby thought marriage would come when the time was right. Gabby wrote in her journal about her next big adventure. She had a van now, a 2012 Ford Transit Connect, and she and Brian were going to build out the inside together. Their plans for a wedding and children were on hold, but Gabby didn't mind. She was focused on the future, starting a blog, a YouTube channel, documenting their travels. She wanted to convert the van, downsize their belongings, and live on the road. But that dream required money. To fund the van conversion, Gabby took a job at Taco Bell in Florida. Her father, Joe, said she enjoyed the job and really liked the people she worked with. Her best friend, Rose, saw how hard she was working. She was working long shifts and 50-hour weeks. Gabby laughed about how she had to tell customers, "Have a taco-tastic day." She thought it was funny, but Brian didn't. He started texting her, angry, possessive. He didn't like that she had a job. He didn't like that she was around other people. He looked down on her for working at Taco Bell. He texted her, "I don't know why you had to turn into one of them. Fucking disgusting. I don't know why you have to work with those lowlifes." Rose saw it firsthand. Brian dismissed anything that made Gabby happy. Then he crossed a line. He called Gabby's mother, telling her that Gabby was working late and hanging out with the wrong people, and Nicole admitted that she believed him. Then Gabby got a message. "Please forgive me for calling your mom, but I'm fucked in every aspect of my life now. I just wanted this week to go smoothly. I'm crying so hard in the dumb fucking bathroom typing this." Gabby responded immediately. "I don't want you to be sad. I'm sorry. I would never leave you." Rose saw the pattern. Every time Gabby found joy, Brian pulled her back. Gabby started saying things that weren't true. "I don't deserve Brian. It's my fault for making him cry." And Rose realized Brian wanted her to feel that way. When Gabby felt small, when she felt guilty, she depended on him again. But something was shifting. Gabby was at Rose's house more, laughing, feeling independent. She was starting to see things more clearly. And Brian saw it too. He knew he was losing control, so he started isolating her, pulling her away from her job, from her best friend. Until eventually, Gabby had no one, no job, no friends, just Brian. In late June of 2021, Gabby and Brian pulled into Nicole's driveway in Long Island, New York. They had driven up from Florida in their newly converted van. Gabby stepped out, beaming. Brian barely said a word. Gabby's stepfather, Jim, noticed it too. Brian seemed distant, preoccupied. They only stayed a short time before it was time to leave. Outside, Nicole handed Gabby $200 for gas or emergencies. Gabby took the money, then suddenly her eyes welled with tears. Nicole asked her daughter why she was crying, but Gabby shook her head and told her mother she didn't know. Nicole pulled her daughter into a tight hug. She still remembers the way Gabby squeezed back, like she didn't want to let go. She later said, "It was the best hug ever that you could get from your child." Before they left, Nicole turned to Brian. "You take care of her. Keep her safe." Brian smiled and told her he will. Gabby climbed into the passenger seat. Brian got behind the wheel, and they were gone. On July 2nd, 2021, 1 year after their engagement, Gabby and Brian officially set off on their journey. A journey that, in Gabby's mind, was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. On August 12th, 2021, 41 days into their road trip, Gabby and Brian were driving through Moab, Utah, when a 911 call came into police.
Grant County Sheriff's Office.
Hi, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm calling. I'm right on the corner of Main Street by Moonflower and we're driving by, and I'd like to report a domestic dispute. Florida with a white van, Florida license plate, white land, gentleman,
Where's it at?
5'6" beard. They just drove off. They're going down Main Street. They made a right onto Main Street from Moonflower.
Or what were they doing?
Cooperative, but we drove by, and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
Okay, you said it's a white van?
White van. I give you the license plate if you give me 1 sec. I took a picture of it.
What kind of white van?
It was, the make was a Ford, model was Transit, black ladder on the passenger side.
Black ladder, passenger side.
White Ford Transit.
White Ford Transit.
Police soon spotted the van and activated their lights. As Brian pulled over, the van swerved and hit a curb before coming to a stop. 2 officers approached. Brian sat in the driver's seat. Gabby was in the passenger seat, crying uncontrollably. When officers arrived, their first question to Gabby was, "Why are you so upset?" Through tears, she tried to explain that she and Brian had been fighting all morning over personal issues. Brian quickly interjected, apologizing and saying he had been distracted while driving. Gabby immediately took the blame, saying she had been the one distracting him. To de-escalate the situation, 1 officer separated them. Gabby was moved to the patrol car, while Brian stayed by the van. When questioned, Brian appeared uncomfortable, stumbling through his explanation. He insisted he didn't want to defend himself, but admitted to pushing Gabby away, claiming she got worked up and started swinging. He said she had her phone in her hand when she hit him and that he was only trying to push her back. When officers asked about the scratches on his face, he admitted, "I know I shouldn't have pushed her, but I just wanted her to take a moment to breathe." Playing down the incident, he described it as a normal disagreement. The officers reassured Brian that he wasn't in trouble. Sitting in the patrol car, still crying, Gabby told officers that Brian had locked her out of the van after their argument. When asked why, she hesitated before explaining that she struggled with OCD and had been cleaning and organizing the van. She had apologized earlier, saying she was just stressed from working on her blog. Noticing marks on her face and arm, an officer asked if Brian had hit her. Gabby hesitated before saying that she guessed she hit him first. When pressed about where he had hit her, she motioned toward her jaw, explaining that Brian had grabbed her face. She denied that he had been drinking. When asked about the van hitting the curb, she started to explain, but the officer interrupted, asking, "So, while he was driving, you were hitting him?" Gabby stammered, still upset, but never really answered. Despite the original 911 call stating that Brian was the aggressor, officers ultimately determined that Gabby was the primary aggressor. One officer noted that she was a 110-pound female and did not appear to be a serious threat to Brian, aside from the minor abrasions from her fingernails. In the end, they decided not to make any arrests, and instead separated Brian and Gabby for the night. When an officer told Gabby that normally they take people to jail and told her they would be putting Brian in a hotel for the night, Gabby burst into tears. She was visibly very upset, pleading with them, saying she didn't want to be separated from him and telling the officers that her and Brian were a team. The officer dismissed her concerns and told her, if she knew she had a lot of anxiety, why doesn't she look at the situation she can get herself into? Then laughed and looked at another officer. Meanwhile, Brian was calm and laughing with the officers. They told him he was the victim of domestic assault and reassured Brian, telling him they got him a hotel room for the night. They joked with him, told him to relax, and laughed about their own relationships and their wives. As Brian laughed along with them, Gabby sat in the van, still crying, still visibly shaken. Brian was driven to his hotel room for domestic abuse victims, and Gabby, She was left alone. Now, in my opinion, the Moab incident was a missed opportunity to save Gabby's life. A 911 caller reported seeing Brian hit her, yet police ignored that and still labeled Gabby as the primary aggressor. She was visibly distraught, crying, apologizing, and hyperventilating. Clear signs of an abuse victim, but officers dismissed it as emotional instability. Meanwhile, Brian stayed calm, joked with officers, and his demeanor worked in his favor. Ignoring all the red flags, police focused on Brian's scratches without questioning whether they were defensive wounds. They failed to ask key questions, didn't apply domestic violence training, and ultimately decided that the actual abuser was the victim. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Gabby had been arrested that day. She would have had to explain everything to her parents, and maybe then her family would have finally learned the truth, not just about the Moab incident, but that Brian was abusing her. At the time, they had no idea. They didn't know about the 911 call. They didn't know a witness had already reported seeing Brian hit her. If they had known then, maybe things could have been different. Maybe that moment, where real intervention was needed, could have saved her life. What makes this even more disturbing is that there was undeniable physical evidence. Gabby had taken a selfie that same day, capturing fresh marks on her face. Yet, instead of prioritizing her visible injuries, officers focused on Brian's minor scratches. This was despite a witness explicitly stating that Brian had been hitting her in the face. This scenario follows a well-documented pattern in domestic violence cases. The true victim is often the one in extreme distress, while the abuser remains calm and composed. Studies show that victims frequently take the blame for the abuse, just as Gabby did when she immediately apologized and minimized what had happened. Meanwhile, abusers often present with defensive wounds like the scratches on Brian, which are commonly inflicted when a victim is trying to defend themselves or push their abuser away. Everything about the situation screamed that Gabby was the victim: her visible injuries, her emotional state, the witness account, and the well-known behavioral dynamics of abuse. A few days after the Moab incident, Gabby called her mother. She told her that Brian was flying back to Florida to empty a storage unit. According to the Laundrie family's lawyer, Brian flew from Salt Lake City to Tampa on August 17th to retrieve clothes and belongings, saying it was to save money since he and Gabby had talked about extending their trip. While Brian was gone, Gabby stayed in a hotel near the Salt Lake City airport, and during that time, I believe, something shifted with Gabby. With distance from Brian, she seemed to be thinking more clearly. She threw herself into working on her YouTube channel, and on August 19th, she uploaded her first video. She also connected with her family and friends. Then, on August 22nd, one day before Brian returned, Gabby reached out to her ex-boyfriend Jackson. He later said he was surprised to hear from her. She told him, "I'm sure I'm the last person you probably want to hear from, but I would really like to talk to you. I'm alone until tomorrow." They ended up talking for hours. Jackson said it felt like Gabby just needed someone to talk to, but even after they hung up, he could tell something wasn't right. At one point, she hinted at an argument with Brian. Then she said something that stuck with him. She said, "I have a plan. I'm going to leave him. I just have to figure out when." Jackson asked her what she meant, but he could hear the uncertainty in her voice. It was like she wasn't sure how Brian would react or what he was capable of. Looking back, he believes that conversation was a cry for help, that Gabby knew she needed to leave but didn't know how. Before they ended the call, he told her, "Be very careful." The next day, Brian returned to Utah, and on August 24th, Gabby and Brian checked out of the hotel and continued their trip. Gabby had spent 6 days apart from Brian, And in that time, she had started to reconnect with the life she had before him. She was talking to people who truly cared about her, focusing on her passion, and for the first time in a long time, she had space to think. Now, this might be just my opinion here, but I believe it's possible that at this point she started to realize Brian wasn't bringing anything to the table. She worked so hard to save up to buy the van. I'm assuming it was her money she saved that is funding their lifestyle at this point. Brian didn't do a thing to help Gabby. And on top of this, he's clearly abusive. I believe it was all coming to a head, and she really was probably finding her strength to leave. And remember what I said about victims being in the most danger when they are trying to get away from their abuser. I believe Gabby at this point probably started becoming distant, and Brian was picking up on it. On August 27th, 2021, just days after Gabby's phone call with Jackson, she sends him a Snapchat. She told him she was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and that it made her think of him. That afternoon, at 1:11 p.m., Gabby and Brian went to eat at the Mary Piglet's Tex-Mex restaurant in Jackson. At some point during the meal, Gabby went to the bathroom and texted Brian, telling him to just ask for the check. The smell of the food was making her sick, and she just wanted to leave. But something happened at that restaurant. Witnesses later reported that Brian became aggressive, arguing with the staff, including the manager, waitress, and hostess. He left and returned to the restaurant multiple times, clearly agitated. Gabby, visibly upset, later went back inside to apologize for Brian's behavior. Then, at 1:45 p.m., Gabby called her ex-boyfriend Jackson. However, he was at work and unable to answer. At 2:11 p.m., Gabby and Brian were captured on surveillance video at Whole Foods in Jackson. In the parking lot, Brian slammed the car door shut, his body language tense, clearly angry. The two walked into the store, shopped, and left. This is the last known video of Gabby Petito alive. That same day, Gabby's mother, Nicole, was still uneasy about what had happened in Moab. She decided to check in and texted Gabby, asking how she and Brian were doing. A response came back from Gabby's phone saying she was fine and that she convinced Brian to go camping by himself. She told her mother that Brian told her she could have the van if she paid him. Gabby's mother was caught off guard and asked her if they were breaking up. Gabby's phone replied, "No, I just said I could make more money as a solo female van lifer. I'm driving to a campsite now." 2 days later, on August 29th, a woman was leaving a church service in Grand Teton National Park when she saw a young man hitchhiking alone near the park exit. He looked like he had been backpacking for some time. She decided to pick him up. During the short drive, he told her he needed a ride to Jackson, but when she mentioned she was heading north, he quickly changed his mind. Instead, he asked to be dropped off at Spread Creek campsite, explaining that his fiancée was in their van working on their blog. As they were turning left into the Spread Creek campsite entrance, her Bible that had been sitting on her dashboard slid off and onto the man's lap. He looked at it and gently placed it back on the dashboard. She drove him into the entrance, but he insisted she drop him off right there instead of driving further, even opening the door before her car could come to a complete stop. At the time, it didn't seem significant, but later, that small interaction would stand out in an unsettling way. On August 30th, 2021, Gabby's mother received a text from Gabby's phone. The message mentioned Stan, referring to her grandfather, but Gabby never called him that. She always referred to him as Grandpa. The wording felt off, and Nicole couldn't shake the thought that Brian might have sent it instead. After that, Gabby's phone went silent. By September 1st, Nicole was still trying to reach her daughter. She sent another message before bed, then another the next morning, asking if Gabby was heading to Montana. Still, nothing. Gabby's social media had gone quiet as well. Her last Instagram post had been on August 25th, 2 days before she was last seen alive. At first, Nicole tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were out of service, maybe they were hiking. But as the days passed, she couldn't shake the growing worry. On September 6th, she sent another message, telling Gabby she had just gotten home from a camping trip and hadn't heard from her. No response. The next day, another message. Still nothing. By September 9th, 10 days had passed since the last contact. Nicole reached out to Gabby's father, Joe, asking if he had heard from her, but he hadn't. Both parents began calling Gabby's phone repeatedly, but every call went straight to voicemail. Desperate for answers, Nicole contacted Jackson, Gabby's ex-boyfriend, to see if he had heard from her. He sent a few texts, hoping she was okay, letting her know her mom was looking for her. No response. Gabby's best friend, Rose Davis, had been waiting to hear from her too. They had made plans. Gabby was supposed to FaceTime her on Rose's birthday, but that call never came. Gabby wasn't the only one missing. Brian had disappeared and wasn't returning messages either. Were they lost in the mountains? Had something happened? Nicole didn't have answers, but she knew something was terribly wrong. On September 10th, 2021, Gabby's mother decided to reach out to Brian's mother, Roberta Laundrie. She had spent days trying to convince herself that there was a reasonable explanation for Gabby's silence, but that explanation was running out. She sent a text. "Hey, this is Nicole, Gabby's mom. I was just wondering if you've heard from the kids. I haven't heard from Gabby in 10 days, and I'm getting worried since she's been consistently in touch. I tried Brian as well, but haven't been able to get in touch." The message showed as delivered, but there was no reply. Hours passed. Maybe Roberta hadn't seen it. Maybe there was a mistake. Nicole sent another message just in case. "I hope I have the right number." This time that text turned green instead of blue, meaning the number had either been blocked, the phone was off, or it had been disconnected. Gabby's father also reached out hoping for an update. His message was similar. He hadn't heard from Gabby or Brian and was getting worried. Both of their phones went straight to voicemail. He asked them to call him back. Days passed. Still nothing. Gabby wasn't just Brian's girlfriend. She had lived with his family, and Joe had believed they cared about her. But after multiple unanswered messages, he had had enough. He sent one final message. If they weren't going to respond, he was going to the police. Later, he would reflect on that moment. If someone told me they were about to call the police over the whereabouts of my child, I'd want to know what was going on. But the Laundries never said a word. Gabby's mother took her concern public. She made a Facebook post with a picture of Gabby with the words on top saying, "Where is Gabby?" By September 11th, 12 days since Gabby's last known contact, it was clear something was wrong. Gabby's family began calling parks, ranger stations, and police departments across the West Coast, desperately trying to file a missing person report. Every department told them the same thing. The report had to be made where Gabby legally resided. That led them to Northport, Florida, the city where Brian Laundrie and his family lived, where Gabby and Brian had lived together before setting out in their van. When Nicole spoke with an officer, she was asked where Gabby was last seen. Her answer was Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming. And with that, the official search for Gabby began. Northport police initially viewed Gabby's disappearance as routine, but as they looked deeper, the details didn't add up. On the evening of September 11th, 2021, officers went to the Laundrie home to ask questions. Body cam footage from the visit is frustrating to watch. The Laundries never stepped outside, choosing instead to speak through the screen door. When asked about Gabby, They refused to cooperate, offering only one piece of information: Brian was home. They handed over their attorney's contact information and ended the conversation. Meanwhile, Gabby's van was parked in their driveway. When officers ran the plates, they confirmed it was registered only to Gabby, yet the Laundries wouldn't explain how it got there without her. At the same time, detectives in New York were making calls. Brian's sister, Cassie, claimed Brian told her he left Gabby at a hotel and flew back home, a story that made no sense. If Brian flew back, then how did Gabby's van end up in Florida? Detectives were hitting roadblocks, not just with the Laundries, but within their own system. A Northport sergeant initially brushed off concerns, pointing out that Gabby was an adult who simply wasn't returning calls. But New York detectives pushed back. She had been missing for 10 days. The Laundries were refusing to talk. It wasn't adding up. That night, the sergeant from Northport PD returned to the Laundrie home, hoping they'd reconsider. They didn't. The family refused to answer any questions and made it clear Brian wouldn't be speaking to police. With no cooperation and mounting suspicion, the Northport sergeant made a decision. The van belonged to Gabby, and it wasn't supposed to be there. He ordered it to be towed and secured as evidence. When the tow truck driver arrived, even he seemed uneasy, hesitating before touching the vehicle. He followed orders carefully, making sure not to disturb anything inside. Moments later, Gabby's van, the last place she was known to have been, was hauled away, finally in police custody. Gabby's mother heard a knock at the door. Detective Barry stood outside and got straight to the point. Northport PD had gone to the Laundrie home. Brian was there with Gabby's van, but Gabby wasn't, and Brian had already hired an attorney. Her family was devastated. Brian was home, with the van, and with a lawyer. There was no time to wait. Gabby's family printed missing person flyers, called organizations, and contacted every news station they could, and Joe flew to Florida immediately. At the Northport Police Department press conference, Joe stood in front of the cameras, pleading for help, not just from the public, but from Brian's family. Someone had to know something. Within days, the story exploded. Gabby's face was everywhere. Gabby's best friend, Rose, saw her on the news and started screaming. She knew deep down Brian did something. On September 13th, 14 days since Gabby's mother received the Stan message about her grandfather, the last contact from Gabby's phone, her family knew someone needed to be in Wyoming. Jim, her stepfather, volunteered. When he arrived, Teton County Sheriff Matt Carr explained that they were treating this as a missing person case. But with national media attention growing, the urgency was increasing. They needed help. One of their first calls was to the FBI. Gabby and Brian's last known travel plans suggested they were somewhere near Grand Teton or Yellowstone National Park, an area spanning nearly 20,000 square miles. They needed to narrow this down. Investigators worked across multiple agencies, analyzing cell phone data and digital records. Finally, they had a lead. Gabby's last known location was near Spread Creek, a camping area in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. The terrain was rough, thick brush, no roads or trails in some areas, steep canyons in others. Search teams covered ground on foot, horseback, and off-road vehicles. Drones scanned from above. What started as a local investigation was now a nationwide effort. Authorities from Wyoming, Florida, and New York worked together, piecing together a timeline, trying to find Gabby. The FBI installed surveillance cameras around the Laundrie home, but as news crews, protesters, and onlookers flooded the neighborhood, keeping track of the family became increasingly difficult. What started as quiet suspicion had turned into full-blown chaos. Protesters lined the street, gathered in front of the laundry's home, while Brian's parents went about their daily routines, showing no concern. The FBI noted their complete lack of cooperation. The Laundry family even took a camping trip after Brian returned home, which further added to the growing speculation. As pressure mounted, reporters showed up at Cassie's home, demanding answers. And unlike her parents, Cassie actually came outside to speak. She told reporters she had fully cooperated with law enforcement since September 11th. When asked if Brian mentioned Gabby during their camping trip, Cassie said no. She insisted that she and her husband were just as heartbroken as everyone else, but then she made a surprising admission. Her parents weren't talking to her either. When asked why, she claimed she had no idea. She said she had been learning everything from the news, just like the rest of the world. A reporter asked the biggest question of all. "Do you think your parents are involved?" Cassie hesitated. Then calmly, she responded that she didn't know anything. On September 16th, 2021, the Moab police body cam footage was released to the public. An FBI agent later reflected on how this footage changed everything. Until then, Gabby and Brian were just names in the media. Now people could see them, hear them, witness their dynamic firsthand. For Gabby's mother, watching was devastating. She saw her daughter terrified, overwhelmed, and apologizing. She said that's when she realized things were way worse than she could have imagined. On September 16th, 2021, the Moab police body cam footage was released to the public. An FBI agent later reflected on how this footage changed everything. Until then, Gabby and Brian were just names in the media. Now people could see them, hear them, witness their dynamic firsthand. For Gabby's mother, watching was devastating. She saw her daughter terrified, overwhelmed, and apologizing. She said that's when she realized things were way worse than she could have imagined. Gabby's stepmother was heartbroken, but what made it worse was the family hadn't even known the full story. They didn't know a 911 caller had reported Brian slapping Gabby. They had no idea a witness had identified Brian as the aggressor. Gabby's ex-boyfriend, Jackson, was stunned. He had never seen her that distraught, but her best friend, Rose, had, and it had been because of Brian. Gabby's mother couldn't believe what she was seeing. She said, "To see the distress my daughter was in, and then to see them laughing and joking around, I could not believe that she was being treated as the aggressor." Gabby's stepfather had trusted the police to help her. He believed they would do the right thing, but the right thing was not done that day. For Rose, the footage exposed what Gabby had been going through behind closed doors. The world got to see the dark side, and now no one could unsee it. On September 17th, 2021, the FBI received a tip from a caller who believed someone in the home, presumably Brian, had possibly overdosed or something and asked for a welfare check. Police arrived at the house expecting to check on Brian, but instead, his parents met them at the door with an entirely different request. They wanted to report their son missing. According to Chris and Roberta Laundrie, they hadn't seen Brian in 4 days. They claimed the last time they saw him was on September 13th, when he left to go hiking at the Carlton Reserve, a massive, swampy nature area near their home. This changed everything. Now, there weren't just questions about Gabby's disappearance. There were 2 missing persons. As soon as authorities released the news, frustration exploded. The public and the media immediately demanded answers. How had law enforcement missed Brian leaving the house? How did the FBI, with surveillance in place, fail to realize he was gone? If there had been any doubt before that the Laundries were withholding information, this only made them look more suspicious. Their son had allegedly been missing for days. yet they hadn't said a word until now. Gabby's family was blindsided. Jim, Gabby's stepfather, was in the middle of a live CNN interview when the host casually mentioned that Brian's family hadn't seen him in days. Jim had no idea. Visibly caught off guard, he later described feeling like a deer in headlights. With Brian now officially reported missing, the FBI moved in. They searched the Laundrie home, collecting potential evidence, and among the items found, they find a letter from his mother, Roberta. The title read, Brian Christopher Laundrie, Burn After Reading. Inside, Roberta wrote, I just want you to remember I will always love you, and I know you will always love me. Then, the letter took a disturbing turn. If you're in jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. The note ended with a Bible verse, closing with, Nothing can separate us. Not even sin, not the thinkable or unthinkable can get between us. When news broke that Brian was missing, Gabby's best friend, Rose, didn't believe it for a second. She believed he was running. Gabby was still missing, and now the only person who had been with her was gone. For her mother, it was frustrating to watch. The media had shifted its focus to Brian, but all she could think was, I haven't found my daughter yet. The FBI made it clear, without a body, they couldn't classify this as a crime, let alone arrest Brian. Their sole focus remained on finding Gabby. And on September 18th, they turned to the public again, asking for help. And the tips poured in, 200 to 300 per day, from all over the country. One of those tips came from a woman named Norma Jean. Scrolling through her phone, she came across a TikTok video from a woman named Miranda Baker, who described picking up a hitchhiker in Grand Teton National Park on August 29th. She now believed that hitchhiker was Brian Laundrie. Norma Jean immediately froze. She, too, had picked up a hitchhiker that same day. She had just left a church service when she saw a young man walking alone. He looked like he had been hiking. She pulled over, picked him up, and dropped him off at Spread Creek. Realizing the connection, she immediately called the Teton County Sheriff's Office. For investigators, this was a critical lead. With the last known location of Gabby's van, they could now narrow the search. At the same time, the van life community had become deeply invested in Gabby's case. A YouTube couple who also lived on the road had first heard about her disappearance in early September. They had been reviewing footage from their trip, and when they saw the news update shifting Gabby's last known whereabouts to August 27th or 28th, everything stopped. They had been in Wyoming that night, and they had footage from Spread Creek. Searching through their files, they found it. Gabby's van, parked in the campsite. They uploaded the footage immediately, and by morning it had over 1 million views. When Gabby's mother saw it, she nearly jumped out of her seat. There's the van. They got it. The FBI immediately went to the exact location. They analyzed the footage, matching up the surroundings, confirming what phone data had already suggested. Now, they had Gabby's last known location. The search was no longer a guessing game. 20 days had now passed since Gabby's last known contact. On September the 19th, search teams returned to Spread Creek, focusing heavily on the river bottom near where Gabby and Brian had been camping. They covered rugged terrain on horseback and on foot, scanning the landscape carefully. Then, a team member spotted something. A body. They had found Gabby's body. She was lying on her side, wrapped in a sweater. Investigators believed she had been in that position since August 27th. Near her body, they found a burn scar on the ground, as if someone had tried to light a small fire. but no fire-starting materials were nearby. Her boots were off, placed beside her. According to FBI investigators, Gabby was not lying in a natural position. They believed the crime scene had been staged. The FBI had already enforced a no-fly zone over the area, trying to shield the investigation from media helicopters. But that didn't stop news organizations from flying over, attempting to capture footage. Authorities needed to protect the crime scene, but more importantly, they needed to protect Gabby's dignity. Her death was ruled a homicide, the result of blunt force trauma and manual strangulation. The FBI moved quickly to notify Gabby's family, so they would hear it from them, not from the news. Sadly, on the morning of September 19th, 2021, investigators informed Jim Schmidt that they had found human remains they believed to be Gabby. Jim had been on the ground in Wyoming, acting as the family's direct contact with law enforcement. And before making the call to Gabby's family, Jim needed to be sure. A detective hesitated before showing him an image. Gabby, lying on her side, her hair visible from the hood of her sweatshirt. It was all he needed to see. Jim then made the devastating call to Gabby's mother, her father, and her stepmother, conferencing them in together. Joe's mind immediately went to the realization, I'm never going to see my daughter again. Everyone who loved Gabby was devastated. Once Gabby was found, the investigation shifted from a search effort to building a case. And now it was about determining who was responsible and gathering the necessary evidence for prosecution. Investigators began retracing Gabby's final movements, piecing together the last known moments of her life. On August 27th, around 1 p.m., Gabby and Brian were at the Mary Piglets, a Tex-Mex restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming, where a witness later recalled seeing Brian visibly upset and angry. At one point, they abruptly got up and walked out, with Gabby in tears. Not long after, at 1:45 p.m., Gabby attempted to call her ex-boyfriend, Jackson. After leaving the restaurant, Gabby and Brian went to Whole Foods. Surveillance footage captured them in the parking lot, where Brian, still appearing frustrated, slammed the driver's side door shut. They went inside, shopped, checked out, and left. From there, they drove towards Spread Creek. That evening, between 6 o'clock and 6:30 p.m., the Bethune family's YouTube footage captured Gabby's van parked at Spread Creek. They later recalled that the van looked dark and closed up, assuming whoever owned it was either out hiking or setting up camp. At 7:15 p.m., Gabby's mother received that text from Gabby's phone, telling her that Brian had gone camping alone and that she could make more money as a solo female van lifer, to which her mother asked if they were breaking up. Investigators later examined Gabby's computer activity from that night. At 8:32 p.m., she was actively moving video files on her hard drive, consistent with her usual behavior, suggesting she was still alive at that time. By the next day, all digital activity stopped. Her phone, computer, and other devices showed no further movement. As the investigation continued, evidence confirmed that Brian had killed Gabby and moved her body to the location where she was later found. On August 30th, Brian left Wyoming, driving Gabby's van back to Florida. Surveillance footage captured him at the wheel. That same day is when investigators say Brian sent that text to Gabby's mother about Stan from Gabby's phone. Along the way, he stopped at multiple gas stations, using Gabby's debit card to pay for fuel. A Zelle transaction also showed $700 transferred from Gabby's account to Brian with the memo, "Goodbye, Brian. I'll never ask you for anything again." Authorities knew Gabby was already deceased. Brian had been using her devices to craft a cover story. And at this point, he wasn't just a missing person, he was a federal fugitive. On September 23rd, a federal arrest warrant was issued for unauthorized use of a financial account. By then, over 4,000 tips had been submitted to the FBI, and even Dog the bounty hunter had joined the search. The manhunt for Brian Laundrie had officially begun. To track him down, investigators retraced his last known movements. They learned that on the morning of September 14th, 3 days before his parents reported him missing, a car had been left in a nearby park. Northport police ran the plates. It was registered to the Laundries. At some point after the vehicle was ticketed, Brian's parents retrieved it and brought it home. When questioned, they claimed Brian had gone hiking to blow off steam from the pressure of the growing media presence outside their house. He had left with a backpack, some food, and a tent. They insisted they believed he was coming back. It wasn't unusual for Brian to spend days in the woods alone, so they said they didn't see a need to contact police sooner. Later, it was revealed that Northport police had mistakenly identified Brian as his mother, Roberta, when he left the house wearing a baseball cap. For days, law enforcement thought Brian was still home, when in reality, he was already gone. On September 18th, the day before Gabby was found, the FBI and local agencies launched a search for Brian Laundrie in the vast wilderness of the Myakkahatchee Environmental Park and Carlton Reserve. Spanning over 20,000 acres, the terrain was flooded, overgrown, and filled with alligators, making the search conditions brutal. Search teams used drones, search dogs, and off-road vehicles, but despite weeks of effort, there was no sign of Brian. Then, on October 20th, 37 days after Brian went missing, the Carlton Reserve reopened to the public. That morning, investigators learned that the Laundries planned to search for their son. Officers accompanied them, and within only an hour, Christopher Laundrie found a waterproof bag belonging to Brian. 45 minutes later, search teams located his skeletal remains about a mile from where he had left his car. His clothes and shoes were still there. Later, it was confirmed he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Many questioned how, after weeks of extensive law enforcement searches, Brian's parents were the ones to find his body so quickly. Gabby's best friend said it made no sense. Inside Brian's waterproof bag, investigators found personal items, including a notebook containing a so-called confession. In it, Brian claimed Gabby had suffered a terrible accident, that she was in pain, and that he ended her life as an act of mercy. Not a single detail matched Gabby's autopsy findings. He also wrote goodbye letters to his family, including a disturbing plea saying, "Please do not make life harder for my family. They lost a son and a daughter." Gabby's mother found that part of the letter unsettling. Why the need to defend his parents? She says it sounded like they did know something. Gabby's stepmother was shocked when she learned about Roberta Laundrie's burn after reading letter. She said for Roberta to say, "I'll bring a shovel to help bury a body," is absolutely disgusting. Investigators still don't know the full extent of Brian's parents' involvement. But what they do know is that on August 29th, 2 days after Gabby was killed, Brian had made multiple calls to them. Within hours, his parents wired $25,000 to an attorney. They later claimed they knew nothing, only that Gabby was gone. Gabby's father, Joe, didn't believe a word of it. He said, "You don't spend that much money on an attorney without asking where Gabby is. It's bullshit." Gabby's family carries their grief every day. Her stepmother says, "You can put on a smile, but the pain is always there." To honor her, they returned to the place where she was found and spread her ashes. Rose said it was exactly what Gabby would have wanted. That day, the family took a photo together, and in the center of the image, a large, glowing orb, a sign, they believe, that Gabby was with them. Her story has already saved lives. Survivors have reached out saying that because of Gabby, they left abusive relationships or sought help. In her memory, the family launched the Gabby Petito Foundation to raise awareness and provide resources for those experiencing domestic violence. FBI agent Loretta Bush emphasized that while Gabby's case received national attention, there are countless others just like hers that don't, missing people and victims whose stories deserve to be heard. Gabby's family has also taken their fight to Capitol Hill, advocating for legislative changes to improve how law enforcement handles domestic violence cases. They have supported efforts to implement a standardized lethality assessment, which would require police to ask 11 key questions to determine if a victim is at risk of serious harm or homicide. Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, believes that if a measure like this had been in place during the Moab police stop, Gabby might still be alive. To date, no criminal charges have been filed against Brian's parents, but in 2022, the Petito-Schmidt family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against them. In 2024, the case was settled. Gabby's family will never get her back, but her story continues to make a difference. Intimate partner violence affects millions. Nearly half of all women in the U.S. will experience abuse in their lifetime. If you or someone you know is in an unsafe situation, help is available. Visit wannatalkaboutit.com for support. You are not alone.